Hello and welcome to episode 309 of the Money to the Masses podcast with your resident expert, as always, Damien Fay and me, Andy Leaks. Damien, how are you doing? Nice to see your face.
Yeah, it's good to see your face. And the reason Andy says that is because the tool, the software we use to do this podcast has just allowed us to see each other by video link while we do the podcast. So we don't actually see each other when we normally do the podcast remotely. So it's quite nice to see Andy, not in the flesh, but visually anyway. But yeah, I'm all the happier for seeing you, Andy. And again, it's been another good week, exciting week. I did suddenly realise that it was obviously Money to Mess's 11th birthday last week, but this week was the second birthday of the Money MOT. So that was something I've just realised today, which is if you haven't done a Money MOT, then go and do it. For those of you who don't know, it's the tool that we built that asks you 12 multiple choice questions. You can do anonymously, in terms you don't have to register, and it will give you a score of how you're doing across your finances, from wills, pensions, investing, bills, and you can then register for an action plan afterwards if you want to try and improve that score. It shows you how you compare to the rest of the population who has taken a Money MOT, and it gives you a grade, so it's A to E, and variations in between, little sort of A plus or whatever. So that is something that's worth doing if you haven't done it. And it's a tool that still is leading the charge out there. Others are trying to mimic or follow or copy, but there is really nothing else quite like it at the moment. But I must add, it's also Andy's anniversary, because it's 2 years ago that Andy joined Money to Messes as a full-time employee. So if we had a round of applause or happy birthday tune, Andy, on the podcast, we'd play it.
Well, it's very nice of you to say, and I'm happy that I share my birthday with the MOT, because I genuinely think the MOT is one of those things that's pushing boundaries. It's out there and it's doing great stuff. If you want to do the Money MOT, by the way, you can do it on your mobile. It works so well and seamlessly on your mobile. What's the address so that people can do that, Damien?
The web address is mot.moneytothemesses.com, and it will only take you 2 to 3 minutes to complete the MOT.
Okay, then, so that's the birthdays out of the way. What have we got coming up on this week's pod?
This week, I want to cover a piece on the pros and cons of combining small pensions. Now, I realised, because I was asked this week, so the content I'm doing on the show this week has been inspired by your emails that you sent in and questions you've asked. And one of them is on the pros and cons of combining small pensions. Now, we've touched upon pension consolidation in the past, but we haven't really gone into the pros and cons. I've gone through the archives. It took me ages to try and work out what we'd covered and what we hadn't. So that's the first piece. The second piece is going to be about the when, how, and what of investing. I receive a lot of questions at the moment about when to start investing, whether they should invest now, what they should invest in, how they do it. So I kind of want to pull that together to give some insight. Obviously, I can't answer it, individual people, but there are some insights I can share. And also there's another question that I think people should really be asking.
And I'm going to finish off with just a short piece, and I'm going to be talking about Avios and Nectar. And something has happened which could mean that there are thousands of people out there that could save hundreds of pounds. Okay, should we start with the pension consolidation piece, the pros and cons of moving, is it smaller pension pots?
Yeah, I'm focusing particularly on smaller pension pots. So this is not anything to do with defined contributions or final salary schemes. I mean, the general rule of thumb is that you would be better off leaving that pension as it is than transferring it into something like a SIP. And of course, you always should seek independent financial advice before you make any pension-based decision. I'm talking more about small pension pots that are defined contribution only pensions. And I had somebody who got in touch to say that they had a couple of pension pots that they were thinking of consolidating because they're very small, and wanted to know the pros and cons of doing so. So I want to go through them today just to give people a bit of insight and link to a couple of other podcasts that they could listen to get a bit more insight on particular topics. So first of all, as I say, get advice when it comes to consolidating if you are at all unsure. And it was quite interesting that Andy did a piece on Nest last week. So I'm not referencing Nest in particular in this piece either, because if you move employers, then you could have a pension pot that you could start contributing to again if your new employer auto enrolls you in a Nest pension. So go back and listen to last week's show if you want to know more about Nest and how that works when you start leaving employment and have different pension pots. But of course, if you decided to leave altogether and went somewhere else and you had a Nest pension pot, then this is relevant to you. So the first thing, you've got lots of small pension pots, and let's say they're a few £1,000s each, and you might think about consolidating them. So that means bringing them into one particular pension provider. Now, the benefits of doing that are that there is a clear ease of administration. So you aren't dealing with multiple pension providers, and some pension providers are quite archaic and clunky. So the more modern pension providers have slick apps and online portals that you can go on and actually look at your pension, and you can make decisions and you can see a lot of information about your pension. Some of your older pensions will probably not have that because they are some archaic forms of administration going on. So one of the obvious benefits is there'll be less paperwork. So you're going to get less stuff coming through the post. You're going to have less emails coming through, but there will be in one place if you decide to pull them all together, and you can manage them as one lump sum, which is obviously a big positive. Now, the other thing that is a positive of deciding to pull a number of old pension pots together, and you may have one of those pension pots might be one that you're using to contribute to now, is that you can monitor performance across your pensions much better. So different pension plans from different providers will have different options, and you've got to go and look at how those pensions are performing, how the funds are doing, and you've got to be able to try and compare them across providers and if they're any good. Now, if you pull them together under one house, that becomes a much easier process because you're only looking at one pot and one provider, and you can then look at the performance and you can monitor that. You can benchmark that against the market or the peer group for that particular fund. And it also means you can formulate a consistent investment approach. So when you have different pension providers, they will have different options when it comes to investing. So it may mean, for example, that a particular pension provider doesn't have a wide range of funds. So you may only have one choice of UK fund. It may not even give you a particularly well diversified, maybe global fund or something like that. So if you want to make particular investment decisions, then you are restricted to what's on offer in particularly these old style pensions. So by consolidating them, you can pull them together. You can put them in a place where you have looked at the pension provider, and I'm assuming it's going to be one that you like because of the investment opportunities that are there, and therefore you can then build the portfolio that you want that's well diversified or delivers whatever it is you're trying to do. Now, that leads on to the ability to control your pension more easily, because if you've got the ease of administration, you want to make changes of any kind, you want to switch funds, change things, you're only dealing with one provider, but you're also only dealing with one pot of money, so you've got one particular asset allocation that you want to change. You haven't got to try and replicate that across a whole bunch of them, but it means you've got better control. But the other important thing is you can reduce the charges that are being applied on your pension pot. So pension providers will have varying charges that they apply to your pension, and some older style pensions are really quite expensive. So those charges are eroding your pension fund.
And Damien, when you say expensive, I suppose some listeners won't know what expensive is. What would you typically say is an expensive, like one of these old pensions that charge high fees?
I mean, they'll be charging some of them north of like 1.5%. So you want to make sure that you're not paying anything too excessive, and some of them have annual fees that they will apply to a pension fund that will start to erode it. So that is just a fixed fee that's taken out of a pension. So let's give a benchmark. I think now you want to be looking at somewhere in the region of about 1%, certainly less than 1.5% per annum that's being taken out of your pension pot. But given that we were talking about the likes of Nest last week, where the charges are incredibly low and even lower than that, and you can actually get tracker funds that are around about 0.5% or less, I just think as a rough benchmark, 1% is a decent number for a pension fund. That's probably about average, and it gives you a bit of a broader choice if you do want something that's a little bit more active. But like I said, Andy, these charges actually erode the value of your pension over time. So if your pension's not growing faster than those charges are being applied, then the pension will actually get smaller. And so when a pension pot is relatively small, and if there is some kind of fixed fee that comes out every year, then that fee can relatively be quite expensive if you turned it into a percentage and compared it to that pension fund. So that's another reason why people might want to consolidate their pensions to stop that erosion.
Got it.
So move on, one of the other reasons may be that you want to access a particular functionality in a pension. So some pension providers don't provide drawdown, for example. And so you might want to end up moving pension pots around because you want to draw down on them. So you actually start to be able to access them. Now, I'm going to come on to something very particular later on, which is one of the cons of combining your pensions, particularly if you're looking to access them. So I'll come on to that. The other thing that's a pro about combining them is it in a way makes it easier to use some of your annual allowances. And by that, I mean that we have a pension annual allowance, and we've covered that on the previous podcast and how that works. But if you want to carry forward unused annual pension contribution allowances from the 3 previous tax years, which you can do, and some people don't realize you can do that. So let's say you had a pension fund that was in existence back then, and you decided this year you wanted to put even more money in than you are permitted. So you earn much more than £40,000 and you want to top up your pension more than 40 grand. You're in a fortunate enough position to do so. You can carry forward unused allowances from previous tax years and use them in this current one. And the issue is you have to go back and get your contribution histories and details from all the other providers that you have to determine any unused allowance that you have. And so that can be really clunky. And one of the problems is if you want to do something like that, which requires you to look across a range of pension providers, then you are hindered by the slowest moving one. And I remember from my days when I used to work in the city and we used to do pension transfers and look at people's pensions or anything to do with pensions at all, the administration of some of these older schemes was a nightmare. And it would take weeks, months just to get a piece of information out because it wasn't online. That has improved, but it is a reason that some people might think is a positive for consolidation. Now, I'm going to jump over to the cons because there are cons to doing it. I think some people think there are only positive things about merging your pots together. Now, one of the things clearly is there can be exit penalties if you start to move pensions together. So some providers do have a form of exit penalty if people want to consolidate. Check if there are any penalties of any kind on a pension. I mean, now, modern pensions, there are less likely to be exit penalties, but older style ones, there could be. And what happens is you would need to look at whether the charge is worth the transfer. So if you are going to still be investing your pension for 5, 10, 15, 20 years, then that makes a big difference because the saving you could have on your annual charge applied by your new pension provider where you're consolidating to over that period of time can more than offset the loss that you took or the hit when you made an exit from a pension, when you consolidated from another pension provider. But again, all these things, if you're unsure, you should seek advice. Now, one of the big ones is loss of existing benefits. Now, older pensions, the people might find this hard to believe, but there are older pensions out there that may, for example, have given you a greater entitlement to tax-free cash. So typically that is 25% currently. So most people will be, oh yeah, you can take 25% of your pension tax-free. Now that tax-free cash allowance could be different for older ones. There are people that actually really old pension plans that I've seen that had tax-free cash entitlements of heading towards like 90%. I mean, they're very rare, but they did exist and they do exist. So you need to make sure that if you move from that scheme, you could be giving up that entitlement, and your new scheme, you're back down to 25% tax-free cash.
I had no idea that that was a thing. I thought when the government introduced, as part of the pension reforms and everything else, the access to pensions at age 55, the 25% tax-free, I thought that was set across the board and it existed for old pensions as well. I didn't realise that pensions carried with them their own tax-free sort of allowances and limits.
Yeah, I'll tell you one thing, is a rule of thumb out there, that when it comes to pensions, and particularly at drawdowns when you're going to retire, but when you have legacy products as well, seeking financial advice is important. Now, there is loads of stuff you can do yourself. If you listen to this podcast, you will know that. But there are times when if you've got very, very old pension products, then having somebody look at them who is going to give you advice, who is then liable for that advice that they give you about whether you should move an old pension, that is worth paying for. And now I used to work in something called the Pensions Review many years ago, and it was a role where we had to look at people who'd been missold pensions by the bank, and we had to go and look at the pensions that they had and the benefits, etc. And sometimes you could even get to a point where you ring up and ask a pension provider information about the pension, and they tell you, yeah, it doesn't have that entitlement, it's only 25% tax-free cash, that's because the person might not understand it, the systems might be incorrect. Often the only way to really know is to get copies of the original documentation to do with that pension. And that means, bizarrely, you probably have to get somebody on one of these places to go and get a microfiche. And I know there'll be people listening to this podcast thinking, I remember those funny machines where you've got that little reel and you scan through, turning it like they do in the films when they're looking at old newspapers.
I used to work for an insurance company, and every so often I'd be moved into that department to help out because they'd be struggling. And I used to like my afternoons in the microfiche department. I used to
hiding?
Yeah, well, just you feel like a bit of a detective because you've got to pull these files out of drawers and like a bit like a microscope and sort of wind through the details. It's it's interesting.
It is when you're young, it is, but that may be what's required, and so it can take time for an advisor to dig out that information, because trust me, they will want to make sure that the information is correct. They won't just take somebody's word for it, if they're any good, that is. The other thing is there can be something called guaranteed annuity rates on these. So some old pensions had an option where you could take an annuity. Now, annuities seem like an old word now. People just think about drawdown, but annuities have their place still. But annuity rates are so low at the moment, that's why people seem to not want to engage with them. An annuity basically gives you, you give your pot of money over to an annuity provider or the pension company, and then they give you regular income for the rest of your life based on the terms and conditions, of course, of the annuity in exchange for that money. And it's a one-way street. So you give them the money, big lump sum, and then you get a regular income. And it means that income isn't going to be impacted by investment markets or anything like that. There is definitely an attraction there for people who want secured income. But some of these old pensions had guaranteed rates to them. So they said, actually, if you want, you can take your annuity with us and we'll give you a 12% annuity rate. And people might have just dropped their coffee listening to that, but I remember looking at these, and there were annuity rates that were incredibly high. Don't forget, interest rates were very different to now. We didn't have quantitative easing that was driving down interest rates and gilt yields in the UK. And so back then, we had interest rates that were like rocketing. So there were annuity rates that are based largely off of gilt yields that they were happy to put in print that they would pay you. So make sure a pension doesn't have that. That's one thing you could lose. Another con is the financial services compensation scheme. Now, if a pension is a contract of long-term insurance, it has coverage under that scheme of 100% of its value with no upper limit. This is something that comes up quite often in our Facebook group when people are talking about pensions and the protection. Now, personal pensions are slightly different. So if it's something like a SIP, they are usually covered up to £85,000 only. And so it could be that if you consolidate a pension that has a protection, an insured pension, that's protection that's 100% of its value under the FSCS, you're giving up some of your protection when you're starting to consolidate into a new pension provider where your protection is that much smaller. Of course, when we're talking about small pots, then it may not be such an issue, but it's something to bear in mind. The other thing is, of course, employer contributions. Some people might get carried away and then say, look, I just want to put them all together into this one pension provider, but their employer is giving them effectively free money by paying into an existing pension that they use. So don't lose that by deciding that you don't want to be part of that pension scheme anymore. It seems kind of obvious, but trust me, it's not. Some people make that mistake. And the other thing, and goes back to the point I raised earlier about withdrawing a pension. Now, you can withdraw 3 pots that are up to £10,000 under the trivial commutation rules that most people don't know exist. And what happens, it means you can effectively, if you want to, you've got a small pot, cash them in. And if you are near retirement, for example, you have to be over 55. And I'm not going to go into the details of this because I'm going to talk about this next week, actually, on the podcast, because there are some rules and nuances of it. But if you have small pots, then you may be able to encash them. And it doesn't impact your lifetime allowance, something we talked about on the podcast before. And it also doesn't trigger a cut in your annual allowance. If you remember the money purchase annual allowance that I've talked about, go back to podcast 228. And I talk about it there, where normally you can have up to like £40,000 a year paid into a pension. But if you start to draw an income via drawdown on a pension, that reduces down to £10,000 a year. So some people don't realise that. So go back to that podcast to get the full details on it. But being able to cash in small pots and up to 3 of them. And there's another nuance actually when it's an occupational pension, which I'll talk about next time. That is quite valuable because it doesn't have certain tax implications that it triggers. Now, that is something, like I say, I'll talk about next week, but something to bear in mind. So if you want to find out about it now, search trivial commutation and you'll find the rules about that. But it's something, if you consolidate, you could be giving that up. One other con that I should just mention, which is in some way kind of obvious, but if you consolidate your pension pots, then you will be out of the market for a period of time while those transactions go through. So if each pot is invested, then if you consolidate them, then to move across, inevitably, you will probably move across as cash and you'll be out the market while that transaction takes place. And depending on the pension providers, that can take quite a bit of time. So you could be out the market. So if you aren't happy about that, then it's something to consider before you try and consolidate. If you want to know more, obviously, about combining pensions, then there are plenty of resources on our website. If you look for "should I combine my pensions" under the search bar on our website, then you will find an article that goes through a lot of this actually and gives you a checklist of things you should bear in mind.
Okay, and so this week's podcast was kind of fed off the feedback and the questions that we got from listeners. So the next piece we're going to do, Damien, is the what's, the how's and the when's of investing.
Yeah. What happens, I get a lot of emails from people who ask about investing, and they normally write to me in a state of desperation or confusion, and they want me to give them the answer, the definitive answer for them about like when they should invest. Should they invest in the market now, or should they invest in this particular asset now, or how do they start investing, or what should they even invest in? So what type of assets? And there's a common theme, and I had a lot of questions like this week. And of course, one thing, I can't give people financial advice because it's regulated and I wouldn't do it. And so I can't give them a definitive answer. One thing they can do is obviously go to our Facebook community and they can have discussions in there about people's views on investing. And it's not advice, it's just people sharing ideas and views. I mean, if you want to look at that, it's facebook.com/groups/money to the masses. But I wanted to touch upon some of the general ideas when people ask me about when that might help some people out there who are thinking the same thing. Now, if we look at when, people often say to me, should I invest in the market today, or should I start investing? The market is high, we're at all-time highs, or maybe I'm worried it's crashed. They may even say, oh, I wish I'd invested in last year. I was going to, but then the market rallied and I didn't, and I thought it was going to crash. And you can see there's an element of market timing in the question. And now the answer to that is that, yeah, you can't market time, or you can't do it successfully over the long term. People who may have done it may have just been lucky, and the chances are they have been. The thing is that I would say to people generally as a rule of thumb, the best time to invest was yesterday. The second best time is today. And that is just the idea that we can try and control the world. It doesn't mean the market isn't going to crash or that it's going to rally, but there is a tendency to want to sit on the sidelines. And if you are wanting to invest, then you have to get to the point where you decide that you are going to go into the market. Now, I go back to when I started my 50k portfolio on Money to the Masses. I remember very clearly, and that was back in March 2015. The market was at an all-time high, and I was going to launch and do this and start running my money, putting my money where my mouth is in terms of how to invest money and how I would do it. And of course, there's me thinking I'm about to hit this at the all-time high here. I'm going to go put my money in, and then the market is going to just roll over, and I'm going to have egg on my face. That's just bad luck if that happens. And of course, that's the view I had, and said, no, look, it's a process. This is how you invest. Everybody's going to encounter this. And of course, here we are, 5.5 years, nearly 6 years later, and the portfolio is up, I think, 51% in profit. So that 50k is now worth over 75 grand. And it's because I applied the process. And one of the things I want people to go and listen to is podcast 117, where I talk about investing at market highs. One stat from that I will mention today is that you are 55 times more likely to get another all-time high following an all-time high in a stock market, so let's say the S&P 500, than you are to get a 10% correction. That doesn't mean you won't get one, but the reality is when markets are in uptrends, you need that uptrend to snap. But once markets are going, the direction of travel or least resistance will still remain upwards for a period of time. So you can keep dwelling on the market's going to fall over, and it will. But the fact is, you will probably, in the long run, regret not investing because of inertia. You'll end up losing out. Now, you have to invest assuming that the market is going to go up and down. It's like trying to surf and not get wet. It's sort of foolhardy. You can't do it. So therefore, when you invest, you know the market's going to go up and down. The key thing is to extend your time frame. If you are going to invest for a relatively short period of time, then the price you get in at in the market is going to have a big impact and is going to be key. But when you're investing for 20 years, the price you get in at is going to be of less importance to the overall trend and how successful you are as an investor than if you invest over the short term. Because if you think about it, going back to like the 10, 15 years ago, the big thing that influenced your returns was quantitative easing and the uptrend in stocks. It didn't really matter that you probably had invested around the time that the market collapsed in the financial crisis. It would have been painful. But what's really driven markets and success at the moment is this quantitative easing and being on that ride and be able to ride it higher. Of course, if you buy in at a high and the market comes off, it's going to impact your portfolio. Yes, it will do. But over the long term, it's more important to be in it than trying to market time. And of course, with the market timing thing, I repeat to people about dripping in and pound cost averaging. We've covered it on the podcast before. But if you put your money in small amounts over time, regular investing, the market falls, you should get excited because it means you're buying more shares or more of a fund at a cheaper price than you did the previous month. And then when markets rebound and go higher, which they will inevitably do over 20 years, then you're going to make more money as a result. So that is the thing on when. I think when is one of those things you can't control. You have to let it go and decide whether investing is for you. On the how, now there's many ways to do it. I mean, firstly, seek advice if you're not comfortable. I think people have to realize that we get to a world where people want everything and they don't want to pay for it. So if you're not comfortable with making your own decisions and you're not comfortable with the idea that you may get it wrong and there's no recourse of any kind, then DIY investing isn't going to be for you. You could seek financial advice and then you could get that advice. You're going to have to pay for that. And of course, you might not like it, but that person will do their best to provide a portfolio for you. Yes, the portfolio falls, that you can't sue them for that. That's just the market. But if they gave you a portfolio that was unsuitable, you're a low risk investor and they'd put you into some crazy investments that are very high risk, then you would be able to have recourse against them for the fact that they'd given you unsuitable advice and make a complaint. So, of course, I'm not going to dwell on the how. It is robo advice. If you want to buy and forget and get somebody else to do it for you, robo advisors, look at our website, there's a whole host of them that will recommend portfolios for you and manage them. All you've got to concentrate on is putting money in. You can go down the DIY route. Of course, you can trade, which is not something I would do personally. You need to have the time and expertise to do it. Investing funds, buy and forget, you can actively manage your own portfolios. So there are ways to do it, but the robo advice and the likes of Vanguard with their diversified funds show you how to build a portfolio. Just look at the portfolios they recommend on robo advice propositions and you will see the equity content, the percentage, how much they give or put in UK equities, how much they put in bonds, how much they put in emerging markets. You've got such visibility now that the how is so easy. It's difficult because I would love people to come back and see the world how it was 20 years ago, where you couldn't invest unless you had an advisor pretty much, or you had to invest via a fund house who would charge you 5% up front before anything had happened. Chuck on another few percent that could be for the financial advisor and you could find yourself 8% down before you start. Now, the world has moved on so much that you can see what people would invest in. Back then, you wouldn't have the visibility that you do now about the portfolios that people build or what you could invest in. It just didn't exist. So now there are propositions that won't charge you anything up front. You can invest for as little as like 0.3, 0.5 or even 1% per annum compared to what was before, where those charges were much, much higher than that per annum as well. And you've got visibility. You could replicate the stuff yourself. It is a great time to be an investor. I don't think people quite appreciate. And so I'm not going to dwell on the how so much. You just have to decide what you are comfortable with, whether you want to buy and forget and you want someone to do it for you, which is going to be advice or robo route, or you do it yourself, in which you might, again, you can buy and forget, maybe trackers or whatever, but we've got stuff on the website about how you can invest. So go and have a look at that. The other thing is the what. So people always ask me, what should I invest in? Or they ask me particularly about particular assets. And that is very much depends on your attitude to risk, which we've covered before on the podcast, and how you determine that. If you search on the website, you'll find that the episodes. But it also depends what you hold elsewhere and diversification. So you want to try and diversify your portfolio. But a lot of this all comes down to the question that I noticed that people never really ask or think about is the why. So before you think about all the sort of when, the how, and the what, it comes down to like, well, why are people investing? And that is the traditional way that happens in financial advice. What they would do is try and find out a fact find, would find out lots of information about you and your circumstances. And then it comes down to what you're trying to achieve from investing and that kind of why. That will then start to determine a lot of the other things. So if you might say, oh, I want to invest because I'm investing because I want to buy my house in 2 years. I want to grow my deposit. Then straight away, well, you don't want to invest because you need access to it in 2 years and you need the money. So you need to keep that in cash. Straight away, you shouldn't even be investing. And so the why of a lot of things, it could be that your one why could be you're investing for your children's future in their junior ISA. Then the asset mix of that particular investment could be very different to your own one, which is for retirement, because the child has a long investing time frame, 18 years for a junior ISA if you do it from birth. And so that will determine how you invest, what you invest in, and when you invest, because when is now, because they've just been born. So I want people to think a bit more about the why they invest. But then also, I think that as a philosophical concept, I want people to try and encourage, say, their children and other people to not have a why, to not necessarily need a why. And the reason I say that is because traditionally people come and they go, right, I want to make more money. And a good example is my friend invests in XYZ and said they've made 20% in something. I'm fed up with the savings rates I'm getting. Well, that isn't really a reason to invest just because someone's doing better than you, because you might not like taking excess risk. So your why there is just because someone else is doing better than you isn't really a valid reason to invest. So you don't really need to be asking the how, what, and whens. But my point on the sort of philosophy of it is that people need to start investing for no reason. So when you get to a point that you're fortunate enough to have money left over, so you've got income and you've got some money left over, even a small amount, to start investing it with no particular purpose. And it becomes a habit, and it makes you much more likely to be successful when you invest, because you then have an investment time frame that is effectively open-ended. And so therefore you don't worry so much about the when, because you are just doing it because you're doing it regularly from income, and you don't have to try and time the market, which is something that people, like I say, try and do because they're obsessed with trying to achieve a particular thing. Well, if you haven't got an objective, no why at all, it just becomes a habit that you do from young. And that's what's quite good about auto-enrollment, to loop back in. People start that young. Yes, it's for retirement, but they just get used to it. It's a good habit to invest. It also means that people start to just focus on the low cost element of investing. So they are just investing without having to have other things that draw on them. So, for example, you might want to invest to produce an income in retirement. That is a very particular type of investing that you would want to do, and requires, like I said before, advice, but it also dictates what you can and can't do or will want to do. So you will want to be able to invest in assets that produce an income. Those assets might be more expensive, whereas when you invest and you don't have a reason and you're just doing it for growth, and you're doing it over the long term, you start to employ good habits, which is low cost investing over the long term. It's about consistency, keeping investing, sticking to that process, and you're therefore more likely to achieve what you want in the long term. So my message to everybody who obviously wants to ask questions about how, what, and when, get advice if you're unsure. There's nothing wrong with that. Equally, you don't have to invest. Don't feel like you do. You're not a failure if you don't invest money. It's just what you're comfortable with. But do focus on why you're trying to do this. What's the driving force behind your investing? Because that will start to answer some of the other questions. It's only what I tend to turn around and ask people that they should think about. And the other thing is, let's try and get into a nice habit where we start to invest without a reason. It's a good habit. Habits will stick after a period of time, and you will pay yourself first and keep investing. And it goes back quite nicely to the millionaire episode that I did, where you start just investing for the long term and you build up money and it will just keep going. And in the end, you could be a millionaire. And we live in a capitalist society, whether we like it or not. And actually accruing wealth is important because it's how people succeed in this society. Pick most people who have got any power over all of us. They are the people who have got wealth. Unfortunately, that's just the way it works. So it pays to just start to invest, to accrue wealth, sometimes just not for any particular reason. And then when you need to dip into it, you can do.
Yeah, I don't. This whole accruing wealth thing, it has got some bad press. People say it's grotesque, and at the end of the day, it's lovely to have something to fall back on. And if you're in a position to be able to do it, then why not?
And on that, what tends to happen is that we get to a point where we suddenly want to achieve something and we have to use our limited resources that we already have accrued or have left over to achieve that, which is retirement, or maybe it's buying houses or whatever. Well, if you just start to accrue wealth with no purpose and allow that compounding effect, so you basically start to take advantage of inflation. I've talked about this on the podcast. Take advantage of economic growth. Take advantage of all the smart people out there who are growing big businesses and being successful. You ride that wave for no reason other than that you can. And like I said, you couldn't really do it 10, 15 years ago that well. You couldn't, not as an ordinary person in the street. Now you can. And that's what I love about the democratization of investing, because if people realize the real power is that there could be a social shift. I can't say that very well, but a social shift, for everybody. If we realise that, and the I can't even say intergenerational now, wealth shift, that's incredibly powerful. And I get excited by it. But anyway, I'm done.
Good. Okay, so moving on to the next piece, and it's something I'm just going to cover off. It's a short piece, really, just as a bit of information for people who may not be aware that there is a little trick you can possibly do if you've got some Avios points kicking around. So what am I talking about? Well, Avios recently announced a new partnership with Nectar. So Nectar is the points scheme that Sainsbury's use, but it's not just Sainsbury's. There's also, you can collect Nectar points if you get your petrol from Esso, if you shop at Argos. So there's a few retailers that use this Nectar points scheme. You no doubt know who Nectar is. Well, Avios have recently merged with Nectar. Just to wind back a little bit, Avios previously had a partnership with Tesco Club Card. That has now ceased. You can no longer purchase Avios points through Tesco Club Card, and so it's an exclusive partnership with Nectar. What does it mean for you if you shop at Tesco or Sainsbury's? Well, if you shop at Tesco, it means you can no longer exchange your points for Avios points. That's a little bit sad because previously it was a point for point conversion rate, which meant if you had a club card and you wanted to convert to Avios points, if you wanted to fly in the future, you could do so. And it's a 1-for-1 exchange rate. Now you can only exchange those points if you hold a Nectar card. And unfortunately, now this is the bad news. We'll get on to the good news in just a second. The bad news is it's no longer a point for point conversion rate. You can convert your Nectar points to Avios, but it's going to cost you 400 Nectar points for 250 Avios points. So to make it really simple, previously you'd have to spend £250 on your shopping at Tesco and you'd get 250 points on your Avios to use for flying rewards and air miles and everything else. Well, now you'd have to spend £400. So it's about twice as much you'll have to pay to get your Avios points. But here is the reason I'm bringing it up in the podcast, and I'll keep it nice and sweet because it's really simple. With Club Card, you couldn't reverse those points. So let's say you've been building up Avios points for a while and you think, hey, do you know what? And especially in this environment right now where nobody's flying, I've got tons of Avios points here. Can I do it the other way round and use that on my Tesco shopping? Well, previously you couldn't do that, but with Nectar, you can. And because of that conversion rate, it actually works out quite good.
So that's interesting, Andy. So I didn't know the full details of what you were going to talk about on this part of the podcast, because I have got about 24,000 Avios points, which I don't quite know how I accrued them just over the years in terms of odd flights here and there on holiday. And I got an email the other day telling me they're going to expire this year, which is, unless I do a particular something like that, which seems a bit harsh because I'm not really going to be going anywhere because, well, we're in lockdown. Even when we come out, I'm not sure air travel is going to be quite what it was, or even that I'm going to be traveling anywhere anyway. So I was looking at these and I was just thinking, well, is that it? So what you're telling me then, Andy, is that I could get some value out of them now that isn't going to be related to obviously holidays, but something I want. So 24,000, how much is that?
Well, absolutely. You've hit the nail on the head there. There are going to be thousands of people who are stuck with Avios points that are questioning how and when are they going to be able to use that. So, Damien, you said 24,000 points there. They look like they're going to expire soon. Doing the quick numbers, that's worth £192 shopping, whether you want to do it at Argos or Sainsbury's. I mean, that's not bad, right? That's money that you were potentially going to lose.
Yeah, so for me, Andy, I think that's a positive because they were going to just disappear. And like you say, it's not worth me if I'm going to cash them in, if I'm going to be able to use them. But I mean, I'd rather have something rather than nothing because I just see these things just building up with no sort of use for me anyway. So that's made my day. Our podcast, Andy, has actually made me £180 kind of inverted commas richer. So yeah, £190. I'm pleased.
Good. I've got a few friends that similarly have got Avios points, and I explained this to them, and they were similarly ecstatic about it. So just for the listeners, if you want to work it out, if you've got some Avios points kicking around, the conversion rate is 250 Avios points, 400 Nectar points. 400 Nectar points equates to £2. Look, I'm going to save you from doing all the maths. Get your Avios points and just divide it by 125. Once you've done that conversion, that's the amount of money that it's worth. So good news all round, Damien. But and again, I'd love to take the credit for this, but this article was actually written by a good friend, Jordan Cox. It's on the site. So if you want to find out more details about the conversion rates, the good news, the bad news, we've weighed up the pros and cons and provided the calculations on there. Then just go into the search bar, and we'll link to it in the podcast anyway, and just search for Avios on Nectar, and it will be the first article that comes up.
Perfect. So we're done for this week then, Andy. So as ever, please do review the podcast. Unlike any other podcast on the planet, we ask you at the end when people are probably just switched off and they've just got to the end of the third piece and go. But please do leave a review. We'll read some of them out in the coming weeks. And they do, like I say, motivate us. It's great for the team to read them. And of course, it's good for us on the iTunes chart or whichever app you use to be able to push us up ever higher and gain more and more listeners.
Good stuff. So if you want to contact Damien, you can do so. It's Damien at moneytothemasses.com. Twitter, it's at moneytothemasses. And we've got the friendly Facebook group as well. Damien, until next time.
Until next time.